Thank you again, Professor Brian and Brendan, for a illuminating discussion, a conversation around sustainability practices. Now, we have a very special guest who's just on my left-hand side, but I'm going to make you wait for a few seconds as we reset the stage. So we just need to reset the stage slightly, but I mentioned previously that we want to hear from you about where you think we should go next year for the QS Higher Education Summit Europe. Up on the screen there is the QR code. This is the time to get your phones out and vote. Want to hear your thoughts. One thing I'll mention later as well is that we will send out a feedback form for you to complete as well, so that we can understand a little bit about what you enjoyed, how you think things can be improved, what you'd like to hear about next year when we continue and reconvene. As I mentioned as well, if you can't wait until next year, we will have several other conferences happening throughout the year. Dominican Republic in September, as well as Kuala Lumpur in November. I should mention that there's Reimagine Education awards and conference as well that will be occurring. That's happening in December in Abu Dhabi, I believe. And nominations for those awards are also open now. So if your institution or your organization is doing some amazing work, there's about 17 different award categories that you can look over. So go onto that website. I think it's reimagine-education.com to find out a little bit more and to get involved. We are very, very, very quickly running out of time and ending towards the tail end of the conference. And now it is my pleasure to welcome to the stage Gary Gannon, the spokesperson on art, education, foreign affairs, social protection, and GALTACT.
Hello, folks. How are you all? I suppose I'm going to begin by saying how much of a privilege it is to be here today, speaking at this summit. And by the end of my contribution, I hope you know that I'll mean that in a multitude of very different ways, which I hope become clear. But for the moment, I'm just going to ask you to hold that word very close to hand, privilege. It'll become the basis of a lot of what I speak about during my contribution. But I suppose first I should begin by telling you exactly who I am, because I'm very conscious not everybody or anybody will know me. But my name is Gary Gannon. I am a member of Parliament representing the constituency of Dublin Central. I'm absolutely delighted to be here as a keynote speaker for a higher education conference that has attracted such impressive people from across the world to share their expertise. And that genuinely is an honour that has led to some degree of palpitation over the last day and a half as I watched in live. So, as I speak to you now, I'm a member of Parliament representing the constituency that I grew up in of Dublin Central, which is literally just a stone's throw across the water there. That genuinely is, for me, the privilege of a lifetime to be able to say that. And that journey from here to there started about 17 years ago when I literally barged in and interrupted the working day of this lady right here. This lady here is Elaine Reynolds. She is the office administrator in the Trinity Access Programme. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with what the Trinity Access Programme is, but the Trinity Access Programme is an initiative designed to bring young people and mature students from demographics not often represented in universities into college, into the university. I knocked at Elaine's door 17 years ago, and actually I should also say that just yesterday Elaine's story was carried on the RTE News, the main radio station in Ireland, because she's just received an honorary master's degree from Trinity College for her work bringing young people into education. When I knocked on Elaine's door, I was completely lost, like absolutely lost. When I heard her story yesterday on the national airways, I smiled, as did literally thousands of other people like me, the broadest grin imaginable, because I'm sure that, like me, many other people were met with that smile when lost, when seeking for a little bit of hope in terms of how we get to education. We were met by Elaine when we knocked so trepidly on that door and asked what it was that we had to do in order to attain a place in what we understood even to be then without potentially not even having the language to conceptualise it, a bastion of privilege. The actual theme I've chosen for this presentation is widening access to create a greater inclusion in higher education. But that very moment when a person such as Elaine smiled at us with warmth when we actually first made that door, that made all the difference. The reason I chose that topic is that education and access to it at the highest level has literally changed my life. It's quite literally the reason I'm standing here in front of you today. I know that is the cliche, and I fully appreciate it, but it did. It wasn't quite like winning the lottery, but was in fact the lottery a type, and I will come back to that more in a couple of minutes. I don't think I'm going to be unique, far from it, in this room, or any room really anymore, when I say that I was the first in my family to go to college, university. But over the years, what I do find insightful about that statement, and I must have heard it 1,000 times in different rooms such as this, is nobody ever says they were the last in their family to go to college. And I think we all know the reason why. We know the reason why that's the case. Even if we don't say this part out loud, with quite the same vigour as we said the first bit. But as we know that education and being lucky enough to access it at the highest levels in this country, or indeed in the UK, or in mainland Europe, or in the US, anywhere really, is the surest means by which we can lock in our privileges. It is, but equally, it's the means by which we ensure those privileges are replicated generationally after that. Education at the highest levels often comes down to the parts we are willing to say out loud and the parts that we aren't. When I met Elaine all those years ago, I had just been what we describe as let go from an apprenticeship I was serving as a young plumber during Celtic Tiger Ireland. I didn't last very long in that job and I wasn't very good at it. But I began that job in 2006 being told that I could go anywhere in the world with that profession. I was training as an apprentice plumber and watched when over the course of a few months waves of tidal waves of economic downturn and depression and inequality subsequently started to emerge. And I was let go from a job I probably wasn't suited to, but I watched as actually not too far away from here, dozens of literally young men who I equally had started on that site who were particularly good at the job, probably dedicated years to it, built their lives around it, but also told that they had to be let go. And I often think about that time and the factors that led me to knocking on an institution like Trinity College door and being met by Elaine. And I often think about how the factors that led me to there, and I promise you, it was just, for me, it was luck. I was working as a plumber in a private college not too far away from here in Griffith College. I was helping build a canteen there. And that was the first time I'd ever been on a university campus as an 18 turning into a 19-year-old who just finished school with a not good enough leaving cert to even think about accessing the university, but also not having the access to the information, not having the cultural capital, not having the people that talked to me about the fact that this was open to us. And I remember walking around that campus kind of knowing that kind of economic tides had turned and what was a thriving building site at one point was starting to kind of see less and less and less people go. And I was wondering why those younger people there who were sitting with cups of coffee in their hand, who seemed to have a little bit more kind of self-assurance in their immediate future than I did, or had access to a secret for which I did not. And it was kind of, with a little bit of audacity of youth, I started knocking at various different educational institutions around the country asking, how do I get in here? And inevitably I was met with a person by Elaine who was warm, who was smiled, and he was very encouraging. But it was the Trinity Access Programme which kind of brought me in and kind of gave me the wings by which I could learn about society, instill the confidence needed, give me opportunity, and that came through that look that stemmed from knocking at that door. In terms of understanding privilege and understanding the Irish economic context today, and I'd argue the European context and probably the American and everywhere else, this is what this is, in Ireland, before I say that, in Ireland we don't really talk too much about social class or indeed privilege in the same way it's discussed in the UK or in mainland Europe, but it is there if only you know where to look and understand the euphemisms or indeed the code words. Or once a year you can read about it in the newspapers, but only once a year. And it comes up under this heading. It's the Irish Times feeder skill list of who gets to go to what universities. And every year this list gives out and shows who does get access to university to highest levels and who doesn't in this country, with the exception of some minor exceptions that I'll also discuss shortly. Yesterday, we all looked at in excitement at using the variety of different methodologies and approaches. QS gave us the ranking of the best universities globally, and it instills a great sense of pride to see Irish universities rising so significantly. But in an Irish context, at least, it is this crude list here that appears once a year in the Irish Times, who tells us exactly who it is that gets to go to them, and a determining factor as to whether or not you get to access these cathedrals of thought usually comes down to one simple issue, and that's money. You can see from this slide here, Ireland has a total of 730 post-primary schools, of which about 48 are fee-paying, representing a mere 6.5% of that overall number. Last year, 7.5% of students who set the Leaving Cert were from fee-paying schools. Of students who progressed to any third-level course on fee-paying schools, 71% of them went to a university. If we include in technological universities, or one of Ireland's two remaining institutions of technologies, or other colleges, 98.1% of students from fee-paying schools attend the third level. In total, 60.2% of DESH students went on to third level education. My great mentor in education is a person named Gannon, who I'm sure a couple of you will know her today. Formerly and for many years, Gannon was the driving force behind the Trinity Access programme, so close to my heart. Many years ago, using a graphic of postcode progression in Dublin, Gannon asked me the question, is it a case that we keep all the smart people in Dublin 6, which had a progression rate of over 99%, or is it a case that we keep all the not so smart people in the community that I grew up in Dublin 1, which had a progression rate of just under 21%. And that just opened my eyes to levels of education and inequality I had, being able to access these incredible universities, incredible places of thought, which gave me massive confidence almost immediately, but I also had to wonder, why isn't that the case for many other people in communities around where I share? So obviously it isn't the case that we keep smart people in one location and unsmart people in another. Very clearly something else is at play here. And language is always revealing, and the prime example of social class concealment in education is found in the usage of the term disadvantaged. Disadvantage is used to classify skills where poor, working class and increasingly ethnic minorities attend, and often used by other actors, including myself in this instance, the state, academia, media commentators to describe students with language that they themselves don't use. The use of the term disadvantage, while intending to be respectful, is unhelpful, I'd argue. It does nothing to challenge the wealth and power differentials between classes that create inequalities in educational outcomes in the first instance. Education is an opportunity which has transformational power, but it can also be a means of exclusion and oppression which seeks to lock in and replicate privilege and makes those who fail in the system not meant to serve them believe that it is their own shortcomings and failures, and those that succeed that it is through merit and merit alone, and that simply isn't the case. I should also highlight that nobody is ever really self-identified as being the cause of that disadvantage. Is this the agents of social injustice are just invisible figures that we simply accept are present to ensure privilege and wealth replicate themselves ad infinitum? I'm going to stop and also acknowledge the fact that that absolutely astounding progress has been made over the past 2 decades or more to open up the incredible universities and institutions that we're talking about here over the last couple of days. I'm very conscious that the Irish Universities Association, for example, are here, and they run programs such as the Disability Access Route into Education, or the Higher Education Access Route into Education, which is here. Every single university that I'm aware of in Ireland, higher education, has an access program which, using slightly different methods and methodologies, bring different people like myself from different communities who otherwise wouldn't be represented in the institutions that we talk about, and I would argue have strongly made them better. Over, I believe, 15 to 17% of most universities now, places are taken up from people from non-traditional means of entry, and those young people and older people have gone in and added substantially to our universities. Pioneering work in relation to widening participation has occurred throughout Ireland from all of our higher education institutions, deploying different methods of positive inclusion with the same goal of greater equality in education. Before my election to Parliament, I spent many years working in educational access, both as an advocate for early school leavers in the north inner city just across the road, which had one of the lowest attainment levels to university in the country and some of the highest dropout rates, And then also subsequent to that, I worked in the Trinity Access Programme, that same organisation that helped me enter university previously. Professor Kathleen Lynch, that great champion of educational equality, has highlighted that because those from privileged schools and social backgrounds dominate the entry to elite programmes year on year, leading ultimately to elite jobs, inequalities, they become normalised. We take no notice of the patterns. They seem legitimate. So in terms of recognising trends and patterns, I want to ask you a question first. What course would you argue in Ireland has the highest proportion of students from lower economic backgrounds? We won't do a raising of the hands. I'll simply tell you, and it won't come from a surprise. The course is Childcare Youth Services. So Childcare and Youth Services students has the highest concentration of students coming from lower income backgrounds of 19%. Followed by social work and counselling. That makes no surprise to any of us that work in education. Because when we talk about a young person who potentially hasn't had access to that information before, they identify education and college with the professions that probably most likely aided and assisted them throughout their life. I'll ask another question. What course in Ireland has the highest proportion of students from affluent backgrounds? Again, it won't be surprise, surprise. It is finance, banking and medicine have the highest proportion of students coming from affluent backgrounds. 80% of economic students were categorised as coming from marginally above or affluent backgrounds. Look, why is it relevant? I mean, we're moving into a different stratification of not only who gets access to college, university, it's who gets access to the incomes afterwards. And I mean, that needs to be taken into consideration. It's not a case, and I promise you, that young people in the north inner city where I'm coming from don't want to access medicine or the healthcare professions by any stretch of the imagination. It's because oftentimes, even with such good work done by the universities, they're still closed off because of inability to access money, the housing crisis, suffocating people, poverty, all of that comes with it. And yet, they're the means by which we still judge people on a single test at the end of a year in Ireland anyway, mostly in terms of how we get access. I also want to use this in terms of talking about alternative access routes into college. Because when we talk about medicine having the highest proportion of affluent students, only 4% of students from disadvantaged students being able to access it. I'm constantly asked by young people, because of my previous work, because of how passionate I am about education, about the type of courses that they can go into. And nursing, for example, is a course that comes up massively for me in terms of young people asking me. Nursing, there are, in terms of post-leaving cert courses, so a stepping stone into institutions, higher educations, there are between 1,168 and 1,296 places for pre-nursing in PLCs. But last year there were only 152 degree places in 13 colleges dedicated to students entering through FETAC or QQI route. I mean, for me, that is a gross closing of the door. It's nobody's fault, clearly, that these routes are available in the first instance demonstrates there's a passion both from the students and both from the institutions, but we have a job of work in terms of meeting that passion. I kind of highlight a number of different areas too. Law would have been the exact same. And the countdown clock is ticking very fast, so I'm going to keep moving on. I could have talked about the fact that only 6% of PhD graduates come from disadvantaged backgrounds. I will talk about different methodologies that I believe work. I did want to highlight the fact that 1 in 5 disadvantaged graduates are unemployed 9 months after graduation in comparison to 1 in 10 affluent graduates. That for me takes into consideration the dark arts. The arts of how a person gets access to information in order to access the employment market. Who gets to do the internships if an internship is unpaid? Who gets access to the information about how these internships are advertised? Oh yeah, also I'm very conscious universities are doing good work in terms of striving to break down those barriers. But yet the figures remain that while we're still bringing more people into our colleges, into our universities, the employment market afterwards looks like this, and we do need to take into consideration the dark arts. There are methodologies that work. In my work in the Trinity Access Programme, I worked in a programme called Trinity Access 21. We took a whole of school approach in terms of our outreach work, going into, at my time it was 14 desk skills. That's widened substantially since I've left, and doing a whole class approach. So if you consider the multi-dimensional approaches of leadership, which I wrote down there, It was instilling leadership in students in terms of being able to be accredited for work that they take on during class time, having conversations like I had in Trinity, for example, about society that I came from, talking about universities, progression routes, talking about access, whether not that everybody has to go to university, certainly not, but everybody should have the opportunity to go. There was career guidance from early years education. I'm very conscious when I go into skills that I would have previously worked on. Career guidance in the first 3 years of a student's life in secondary school was often taken up by emotional support. And being able to fill and bridge that gap of giving students access to information about the courses they're going to take. As the clock continues to pile down, I will also lay a challenge down. I talked about the number of universities across Ireland. The UK I'm also very conscious of too. As usual, Cambridge and Oxford are ranked second and third in terms of the university rankings. Actually, a couple of years ago, I met the first and second cohort of Oxford's Access programme. So, I mean, incredible things are happening across the board, but we don't have the data yet to back it up. And that is the challenge I'm laying down. In terms of widening participation into universities, we need to know what methodologies are working. There's been very little evaluation of 19 published studies in 10 years worldwide. Despite a huge shift in rhetoric and some welcome targets for diversity and inclusion in higher education, we are in some respects staring blind. There is no doubt that a huge amount of excellent work has been done, but we have no way of establishing best practice, let alone share it. So in terms that we need, and I'm conscious I'm a policy maker, dedicated and meaningful research funding to establish evidence-based best practice. So there are clear some trailblazers in this area, and research is a tool to distill that inspiration into policy. We need to remove the data sharing barriers between sectors, be that second level, further education, higher education, so we can get a complete picture of the student journey. We need to know where students from outreach programs go next in order to really evaluate their effectiveness. We need this data to change the national conversation about education. We can no longer keep relying on the Irish Times once a year to do that for us. I will conclude by actually repeating some of the words that Brian just said before me. The world is on fire, and I don't believe for a second universities are just going to stand back and watch that. But what I do, I'm passionately committed to, as we seek to put out those fires, be that in climate, be that in increasing automation, AI, who gets to be part of that journey? Because we need people from every single demographic to bring their passion, their knowledge, their expertise in research, the reason why they're passionate for this. The universities are going to be the places where we solve the crisis of the future. We know this because you always have been. We need to widen the capacity of even more than the work that's already been done of who gets to lead those charges. So thank you very much.